Hello and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Tonight we are joined by Jasmonae Joyriel. And I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly.
You have.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. For everyone who wasn't here just a second ago, I asked. So I'd love to start right off asking you about your profession. Would you like to tell the room what your profession is and what line you specialize in?
Yeah, so I am a licensed psychologist, and I specialize in complex trauma, sex, and eroticism with individuals and couples, and then just major life transitions. And really got into that work initially through doing trauma work with high risk occupations and really loved that, but then realized I was always missing part of the puzzle. And I was like, I really think, I need to see like more to this person's story. It's not nearly complicated enough. And got into doing couples work. And with couples, just kind of realized that so much wasn't discussed when it
Mm-hmm.
came to sex and eroticism. But also, there's just a lot of shame around that topic.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and so, it's been a really beautiful evolution to my work. But it is so much fun. It's so like it's I know people say it's fulfilling, but like it really is. Like helping people learn to normalize these discussions that are like necessary and that are really impactful to how they live
Right.
is just something I've really enjoyed doing.
I can see where you would find a lot of enjoyment. It probably makes you really reach deep into yourself and into who you're helping to really, you know what I mean, really be able to reach new levels of your expertise. When you talked just a minute ago about this isn't in my questions, but because you said it, I'm just kind of piecing off of that. So I do that, so bear with me. um, you said a lot of shame and stuff in that when you express your um, maybe your desires and eroticism and stuff. And I fully understand it because I've been married, let's see, 31 years. And
Congratulations.
I've well, thank you, thank you. But I got married at 19, so that kinda puts that out there. So but I even find it hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna be 51 this year, so I've gotten to a little bit I'm a little more vocal than I was in my 20s. But do you think it pulls back from the intimacy in the moment when you have to tell someone what you want? You know what I mean? Do you feel like do you know am I making sense on that kinda direction?
I understand, but I think that's exactly part of what we've incorrectly learned is
Mhm.
like w- that's exactly what we need to do is tell people what
Yeah.
we want.
Yeah.
That part of creating consent and really fulfilling desire is that I have to one know, right? I have to be aware, embody and know my desire. But
Mhm.
then really inviting my partner into helping fulfill that desire. And realizing that it's unlikely to be their desire as well, right? That there's something
Yeah,
that
oh,
goes
yeah.
really beautifully with sex and eroticism and desire is like that there's also autonomy. So what I love and what I want is likely not the same as what you love and you want. And where that communication really blossoms is that we no longer miss each other and no longer assume and then no longer feel disappointed or let down or embarrassed or pressured or judged,
Mhm.
but instead we really feel supported and we get to collaborate and we get to have independence from what you want and what I want, right?
Right,
We start to
right,
play and create together.
right. I'm gonna backstep just a minute because I like I said, I went ahead a little bit just based on what you were saying.
Of course,
So,
go for it.
I gotta
I
follow
go
my
anywhere you
questions here.
go.
I gotta follow my question line here. So, what directed your path down this field?
So I think initially I I jumped in psychology, which I think a lot of people do, which is like, all right, there's gotta be something that makes sense of all the
Right.
shit I've gone through.
Mm.
Um, that in some ways I had this really beautiful story where my parents both came from super humble means, and I really think kind of were like the poster for like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like both of my parents did that.
Mhm.
Um, However, while it was like like picture perfect on the outside, there was a
Right.
lot of imperfections on the inside that caused, I think, a lot of wounds for everyone.
Mm.
And eventually resulted in my parents getting a divorce after nearly 30 years. So that tells you, like, I mean, they put a
Mm.
valiant effort in, but it destroyed their relationship in the end. And I think it left a lot of wounds with me, a lot of wounds with my brother. And so initially, I just wanted to figure myself out. And I love patterns and puzzles, and I got to the end of undergrad, and it was like, I think it was 2021, right on the cusp, and was like, oh, my life is a shit show. Nobody should take advice from me. Nobody should follow any, like, anything I have to say. And I think that was a blessing in disguise. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people end up going to grad school straight out of undergrad, and you're just missing wisdom. Like, you can learn a lot from a book, but you cannot gain wisdom from a book. You
Mm.
can gain
Mhm.
knowledge, but not wisdom. And so I kind of intuitively knew, like, I'm still trying to get my life together. And so I took a little bit of an off beaten path. I thought I was going to go to law school. And I had a
Mhm.
girlfriend who was there who was like, don't do it. I know you, you will hate it. And I just had the good fortune to listen to her, that I valued her opinion. Um, and I think at the same time, I was starting to recognize and call bullshit on this world of like white collar and blue collar work, and that there was something that was missing in what I was taught about careers. I was in the service industry, and then I had gone into sales, and I hated sales. Even though that
Mm.
was the quote unquote professional job, right, that you get
Mhm.
after you graduate. And I loved like waiting tables and bartending.
Right.
And so I ended up back doing that, and was like, what about this? And kind of was like, it's dynamic. I get to be who I want to be. And I started to pick up these pieces, and I was like, but I also don't want to give up my nights and weekends forever. And was watching Tabitha Salon Takeover. It was a show that used to come on Bravo. And that inspired me to become a hairstylist. And so very far off the beaten path, but also not, right? Like, that I was
Mhm.
still working with people and learning their stories, and building
Well,
these
yeah.
relationships.
If you think about it, you just had 2 careers where you've listened to people's stories, a bartender and a hairdresser.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And and
Yeah.
and and I think also just learning to have more confidence in listening to myself, right? To
Mhm.
to go down those paths, I had to learn to listen to my true north rather than the true north that was prescribed to me. And
Right.
so I love doing those. I was also on my own healing journey, and eventually, as I was married for a bit, and had my son, and as I came back, was finally like, I think I'm ready. That it'd been 7 years, and was finally ready to, like, I think I'm in a place where I know who I am, and I feel really grounded in my identity. And now I feel like I could offer something of value to others. And that eventually led me back to school. And so went to school, and like I said, I I don't come from like an easy life path. And
Mhm.
so I think I just have always kind of felt really good and comfortable in spaces that I think probably scare most other people away. I'm like, oh, this is the playground I know. And that was in trauma initially, and I love the work. And
Mhm.
I typically go towards places that feel really, really challenging, where people always say are hopeless. Those are often the spaces where I'm like, "Hmm, let's see about that."
Mhm. Right.
uh, and it fit, that I think I have really thick skin given my life story and given some of the things I've gone through. I was in a really abusive marriage. you know I grew up as a military brat, so moved around every couple years, so having to pick up and restart my life over. um you know I was in high school when a lot of the war and stuff was happening, and so watching family members get deployed, and just a lot of different things that, looking back on it now, made me uniquely qualified to create space for those who needed
Mhm.
it, and to not balk and not to feel discomfort that I think sometimes you can when you hear stories that are really, really complex and really, really heartbreaking and gut wrenching. But I could sit in there with them. And so that's really what got me started. And like I said, I think as I just evolved, I really loved the system. I really loved working
Mhm.
with couples, and that really got me into the start of working with sex, because that also just felt like, well, this is the piece that's missing, and this is the piece that
Mhm.
nobody wants to talk about. So
Right.
like always, where people say no, I'm typically like, we'll see.
Right. So you
Yeah.
started out basically wanting to help yourself. And
Hmm.
then as you got deeper into it, you really had a passion to working with couples. So that led right into doing more of the sex therapy in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think not even just that it helps couples, but it's a place that we don't get great education. We don't get a lot
Right.
of exposure. And even within couples therapy, there's so many couples therapists that are really, really squicked out by getting into conversations surrounding sex and eroticism and kink and different relationship structures. And it ends up isolating and excluding so many people who want to feel connected, who want to be fulfilled, but don't really know, how do I talk about it? Right?
Mhm.
How do I get through this space where every time my partner comes to touch me, I start to cringe, right? But
Mm.
somehow I know that that doesn't feel right. Or I want to say, I want to try this new thing, but I'm so afraid that you're going to judge me or look at me. Or I don't really love what you're doing to my body right now, but I'm paralyzed and I don't know why I'm paralyzed and why I can't tell you no, even though we're in a consensual relationship.
Mm.
And those are spaces where, to me, it's like you have to be able to talk about sex. And
Yeah.
the benefit of being able to do that, I found in this work, was when you found your voice here,
Mhm.
you started to find your voice everywhere.
Yeah.
That sex is so raw and so just stripped down, that if I learn how to create consent and I learn how to embody my boundaries, I learn how to speak up for the things that I want and need in the bedroom, right? For my
Mhm.
own pleasure, for what I want and need to feel fulfilled. I can take all of those tools into every part of my life. And
Right.
that was just like, wow. Yeah, who wouldn't?
Actually, I'm actually learning as we're talking. In my own life, I have had time in therapy, not for a sexual issue, not at that time, but I have been in my life because, like I said, I am in my 50s now. I have been assaulted a few times, and it
Mm,
has, but in all honesty, if you ask majority of women, there are going to be times in every woman's life that they have been put in a position. You know what I mean? Like sexual advances or what, or where they've had awkward conditions where they've had to move out. So I find myself, even though I've been with my husband and we have a loving relationship, don't get me wrong, we have our squabbles, but
Yeah.
I won't lie to you and say that it's roses over here, but for the most part, we have a healthy relationship. But I still find I'm not as sexual as my husband.
Mm.
And I know that's not every woman's scenario, but for me, I have I guess you would say hang-ups on it. Not so much that I don't want certain things. It's just after I've already reached where I needed to go in the moment, I don't want to play anymore. So and that's about the
Yeah.
nicest way as I can say that. And I don't know if it's because of my hangups. I do know when I was reading some of your bios and stuff about you have a phrase in your bio about some of us being taught that to wait until we were married. And that was my case. But again, you can't judge me too greatly on that because I was 19 and
Yeah.
I yeah,
Yeah.
and I grew up with yeah, and I grew up with very strict parents. So um yeah, I would kinda say and actually, my husband just entered the room.
Hello.
This should be a whole good conversation. Anyway, so I find myself, um, uninhibited, I guess, at times. I'm not as open with what I want.
Yeah.
And so, as you're talking, it really is interesting to me to listen because 'cause I'm trying to grow here even at 50, because 'cause you're never too old to that.
Yeah, and you're always learning and growing. And I think that's part of it, right? Like if I can't freely ask for what I want, why would I want to engage in it at all? Like,
Right.
I had a conversation on another interview I did, and I was like, if the only thing you could get was McDonald's, like, yeah, you'll go there if you're hungry. But it's not the same if you can go and get, like, a steak or, if you're a pescatarian to go get, like, some, I don't know, sea bass or something. Like, that's something I'm like, "Oh, man, if you're offering me that, absolutely, sign me up." But if it's
I
like,
I'm glad I'm
"Okay."
glad you mentioned the sea bass because I don't eat red meat. My husband does, but I don't.
But exactly that, right? Like, we have
Yeah.
different desires.
Yes,
Um,
very different, yes.
and
So,
so
let me broach a phrase to you that's in your bio. Don't be afraid to fire your therapist. Can you tell me what that means to you?
that simply means that therapy is a language. And
Mhm,
I think one of the harms in thinking that any therapist can work with any
mhm,
client is it sets a client up to feel really disempowered and
mhm,
to distrust their intuitive knowing of whether this is a person they can do the work that they really need to do.
mhm,
Um, when I say don't be afraid to fire your therapist, is there are different styles of therapy. There are different perspectives and lenses, right? Like, as a therapist, I don't just come in with my skills, I come in with my entire history. I come with my ability to navigate, my own traumas, wounds, hurts with yours. And this is
mhm,
every therapist. Any therapist that tells you, nope, it doesn't come into the room, that just tells me that you're disembodied, right? As a therapist. Like, therapy is interpersonal work, which means it impacts me and it impacts you. And we see this in
mhm,
a lot of different ways. And research has supported over and over again that the gold standard of therapy is evidence, right? Evidence based work, clinical expertise, so my judgment as a therapist, and then the therapeutic alliance or relationship. You need all three of those really to see effective and impactful change, right? And
mhm,
when a person goes into therapy and they think, I just have to sit here and this person's the expert, they know what's best, then what happens when they're not seeing the results and they're not opening up and there's not a desire to open up, is you can really start being like, it's me. I'm the problem. I'm broken. And I just don't believe that. And I say that as a person who's sat on the other side of the couch. And I
Mhm.
remember there was this therapist I was working with, and I was like, I don't feel safe with her. And I was working with her for like 5 months. And I was like at the point where I was like, I wonder if I could say my cat died so I could avoid going to therapy.
Uh,
And I
yeah,
was and I just had, again, I was fortunate enough to be in a really great supervision, and my supervisor was like, "Why don't you just stop going?"
yeah.
And it was so profound, that statement of like, "Why don't you just stop?" And I was like, "Because I want to go to therapy. Like, I want to feel better. I want to improve. I want these gains." And it's like, so if I stop going, then I'm quitting on myself.
Mhm.
And and it was this process like, well, there are other therapists out there. And I was like, huh, I guess there are. And it like was like, and here I am. This is like when I was in my master's, right? So this was a
Mhm.
while back. But here I am in a program, you know, and it had never occurred to me that it may simply be that it wasn't a good fit. That maybe it wasn't her, right? That it wasn't that she lacked skills, but maybe
Mhm.
it also wasn't me. That I was being resistant, or that I wasn't trying, or I wasn't using the tools, or I wasn't dot, 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 fill in the blank. But maybe we were just simply not a good match. And the amazing thing that happened was when I stopped going to that therapist, I really started thinking about what is the therapist I need, like who is the therapist I need to do the work that I really want and need to do. I found a therapist that spoke my language. And it
Mhm.
was such a better, smoother process towards healing. Like that therapist could challenge me and could push me, and I would open, right? And I would receive, because for once, it wasn't me distrusting myself, but like there'd been this space where it's like, you are the person I can do this work with. And it was, when I say it is a complete 180, like you need to find a therapist who works for you. Like I stand by that. When I say don't be afraid to fire your therapist, you could fire me. Right. And I tell my clients that I'm like, if I am not the right fit, this work is not about me. It is not about my ego. It is not about, my status or my title. Like this work is about you. And that is the first place where you get to feel empowered, is you are choosing me, not the other way around.
Mhm. I can relate to that. When I like I said, I did therapy some years ago. I had an eating disorder, and I did it for 2 years until my insurance was fighting me on it, but I it took me, like, I think I went through 3 or 4 therapists before I found one that was the right fit, and in just example, I had one that wanted me to go to a nutritionist, but the last one I ended up being with, she said, "I'm not even gonna bother trying to send you to a nutritionist because as much as you've been doing this, you already know the calories and everything that's in the food." I bring that up only is because it was a vast difference in someone that understood that I wrote it all down and, into
Yeah.
diaries upon diaries of it. So I get what you're saying. I really do. And it
Yeah.
helped me immensely.
It will
Sometimes it
change.
yeah, sometimes it just takes a while to find the right one, and I love hearing that you say that you can fire because there's so much pressure like, do I have to stay here?" Or maybe I have to hear what she's saying to be able to heal or be able to move on. So it's very refreshing to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think it's like, even if, right, I think they're like, even if there's that could be the right therapist, it doesn't even always mean the right season. And I think just starting that way
Mhm.
just gives you a chance to breathe. Like coming to therapy is really fucking hard. It is like so fucking
Yes, it is.
hard.
It
And
is.
and and so just getting in the door is a feat in itself.
Mhm.
And when you put all of that to like, oh my gosh, here, I'm gonna bare my soul to this person, like the last thing like you need to do is then feel like you failed at this thing that took so much work to do,
Right.
right? Versus, okay, I did this and let me do the next part of trusting myself that maybe this isn't the right one.
Right.
And I can feel like, all right, like I am still on this process. I still have the momentum. I'm still going forward. Right. And rather than, well, I might as well just give up. You know what? This one didn't work. And that means that I am just a lost cause.
Mhm.
And, like that's it. That's what I got.
So, is there a defining process to finding your own sexuality and freedom of displaying it, or does it differ from person to person?
Finding your own sexuality and what?
In the freedom of displaying it, finding your own sexuality and the freedom to be able to display it. Does that vary between person to person, or is there a pattern which you would go through to break down that?
Oh, I think it's definitely contextualized. I think everything, everything is that context matters. And so, depending on how you came into your sexuality or how you're coming into your sexuality, changes, like, I think significantly how that's going to then be embodied, right? Whether it's in the therapeutic space, whether that's in your life. We have different are different, like sort of like margins, right? Like if you think of it's not like a hard line, but like a margin of space in which this feels comfortable for us and this feels really outside of who we are. And so I think that part is pretty, typical of people, that everyone has a margin, but getting to
Mhm,
that margin and what that margin looks like is very, very nuanced. And I
mhm,
think for me, when I in the way that I do work, it's I'm not trying to push you outside of your margin. I'm not trying to push you to be okay with anything and everything. Like, I definitely have things that I'm uncomfortable with from a personal level, right? But what I do want to encourage you is to figure out what your margin is. Like, what does it look like? How wide is it? What is the best way to approach it, especially in partnered exploration and sexuality, like, is how do I say, right, when I'm getting close to that boundary, like this is a boundary versus, oh, maybe I just need time to settle in, or I want to explore, but I need to go at a different pace. Right. And
mhm,
so that is the work I really love, is like, how do we discover what your margin is, what it looks like, how wide it is, and then how you want to communicate that in a way that feels really empowering.
right. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So, I know we went past just a little our 20 minutes, but would you mind me asking you just one more question? That'd be all
Absolutely, go
right?
for it. I'm here.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Actually shut my timer off because I didn't want it to buzz when we got down to the last 2 minutes. So, I was like, "I don't wanna freak her out, I really don't." Um, so discovering your freedom to choose, how hard would you say that is becoming reality for us all? Would you say as we drift down this day and age that it's becoming easier, or do you think it's becoming harder to be able to break those boundaries?
I think when I think about that phrase, the freedom to choose, and how hard it is,
Mhm.
I think the difficulty lies in our ability to know ourselves,
Mm,
right? The freedom to choose, when I really know who I am and I know my needs and I'm self aware and I'm fully embodied, that becomes easier and easier, because not only do I have that power to choose, right? And I'm
mhm,
comfortable and I can own it and fully take advantage of it. But now I have so many options to choose from, right? I'm not stuck um like in a place where there's a lack of resources, or there's a lack of touch points, or people who could be part of my tribe community, who could see me, who could understand me, who could hear me, who could validate me, right? Like there's so much more access to that. But I
Mhm.
think the difficulty and the challenge with that is that more and more of us struggle with knowing who we are.
Right.
Like, who what do I really want and need? That there's so much noise. I talk about your true north, and to me that's like your deep knowing, that intuitive self that says go left, go right. Don't go to law school. Become a hairstylist, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
that is muted for so many people in this world. That it's, I saw this, I was told this, my parents said this is my lineage, I'm afraid to do this. And when it gets down to, but like, what does your true north say?
Mhm.
People are like, I don't think I've ever heard my own voice.
Right. I can get that. I mean, it took me I've I've written about 12 books, and it took me, oh, let's see. I had to be what, late 40s? So I feel ya. I really do. And I've had those jobs too. I've worked at convenience stores, and I've done the manual labor, and I've worked in an office. So I fully understand what you're talking about as far as finding your true north. I want to thank you so much for being on. In fact, if you ever want to come back, my door is always open. We'll set a platform for you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is
Yes.
fun.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad you enjoyed it because, like I said, if there's ever anything that you want to have, like a main discussion on any particular point of your profession, I would, like I said, open door. You're more than welcome to come back. Contact me anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on for this.
Well, thank you for being here. So, for my listeners, I know everyone seems to like these. I get a lot of comments on this. Our Amazon deal of the day because we're entering the holidays, and I do my best to try to find these guys. I really, really do. So today's Amazon deal is a Keurig K Slim single serve K cup pod coffee maker, multi-stream technology. This one's white, but they all have them in all various colors. It is now 38% off from the $129.99, leaving us at $79.99. I will make sure the link is in the bio for anyone who's interested. I want to thank our listeners, as always. Until next time, bye bye for now.